Hello everyone, this is episode 11 of the Hexton Knits podcast. This week I have for you sock madness knitting. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about color dominance in stranded color work and how to choose the right type of needles when you're going to start doing magic loop knitting for the first time. As always, I'm coming to you from my home in Okinawa, Japan, and I have snippets of life here in Japan to share with you and what we've been doing while we've been on vacation. Obviously, we are not in Tokyo like we planned, so stay tuned for all of that. If you want to get in touch with me, you can comment below, or you can find me on Ravelry and Instagram as Hexton Knits. Let's get started. First of all, I'll talk about what I'm wearing this week, since I think this is the first time I have featured this one on one of my episodes. This is the Tegna sweater, and you guys are not going to be able to see it. I am just sitting here. Lovely. There you go. Anyway, this is Tegna by Caitlin Hunter. I think I made a little bit of an unusual yarn choice with this. The yarn I used is Debbie Bliss Donegal Fine, and it's a tweedy yarn, so you can see the little tweedy bits of blue and red throughout here. It is a merino nylon yarn, and it just kind of gave a different texture than what I've seen other people use for this project. But this is a gorgeous little t-shirt. It's got a very fancy bit of lace. Let's see there. Yeah, you aren't going to be able to see that very well thanks to my lighting today, but just an easy to wear kind of t-shirt. I think if I were to make it again, I would make it actually a couple of sizes smaller. The pattern recommended a certain amount of ease, and I'm finding that I don't really like this much ease in my sweaters so much, but it turned out well and it's good for me here. So if you have any questions about that, you can see all the details on my Ravelry project page. As promised last week, I have quite a few finished objects for you this week. I showed you last week that the qualifying round of Sock Madness had started, and so of course, I have socks done. This pattern is Wohin, and I talked all about that last week, but it was the qualifying pattern to participate in Sock Madness this year, and so of course I've got both done and have been placed on a qualifying team. I'm going to be on Team Raspberry Lemonade. So the Sock Madness teams are listed A through Z. I suspect that the closer to Z you are, the faster and more of an experienced knitter you are, and the closer to A you are, the slower or less experienced knitter, because that's kind of the way the teams finish. Is usually the end of the alphabet finishes faster, and then the other teams finish slower, and that's fine. That's why we get put on separate teams based on speed and skill level, so that you can have everyone have a lot of fun in this sock knitting competition. But to get on a team, you have to finish both socks within a 2-week period. So these socks took me about I don't know, 7 to 8 days to complete, which is a little bit slow for my sock knitting on the competition. But it's a qualifying round, so I knew that I wasn't going to get kicked off if someone beat me to the punch. I just had 2 weeks to complete them. Like I said last week, this sock is going to be a free pattern, but right now it's only available if you're participating in the Sock Madness events. But because it's going to be a free pattern, I'll talk about it a little bit. So one of the things I like about this is that nothing is really standard for your average sock. You are doing a 2x2 rib, but yeah, you won't be able to see that. It's like a broken rib. So you do a few rows of 2x2 and then you alternate. So your knit, purl, knit, knit, purl, purl becomes purl, purl, knit, knit, just to give it a little bit of texture. This technique is done with what's called a tuck stitch. And if this looks intimidating to you, you shouldn't be. It's actually really, really easy to accomplish. So the way this works is that these stitches here, you actually knit a garter ridge. So right here, this black contrast color, you're gonna knit a row, purl a row to make a garter ridge. You just drop that contrast yarn and let it hang and knit about 6 rows, I think the pattern was, of your main color. And then you're going to pick up your contrast color that was floating in the back and very loosely carry it up the inside of your foot, which I will show you here. You can see there's the loose carries of the contrast yarn. And the way this stitches is accomplished is that you will pick up, let's see, hold on, I'm left-handed here. So you are going to pick up the garter ridge from 6 rows down with your right hand needle, and you're going to sit it up onto your left needle, and you're going to knit that contrast color together with the next stitch that was on your needle anyway. So that's how that particular stitch is completed. On the bottom section, they use a completely different stitch. I think they called them tuck stitches and dip stitches, but for this part of the foot, instead of reaching down and picking up a stitch, you actually ladder down and knit. You know what? I don't need to tell you how to do that. You can look at the pattern when it comes around, but just the short notices. There are 2 different types of stitches in use. Both of them are pretty easy to do, and if you are thinking about trying this pattern out, you should. Don't be intimidated if it's something you haven't tried before. Well, I'm on a team now, so like I said before, my team is Raspberry Lemonade. Each year the names of the teams have themes. So last year it was dog breeds. I was on Team X, and I'm going to put a picture of this dog and the name of it because I can't pronounce this particular breed of dog. But this year all of the patterns were named after a designer on Ravelry who is also a participant in the Sock Madness for many, many years. And so our team is Raspberry Lemonade, and that's the name of a sock pattern. So I'm going to put up that particular pattern so you can see it, and I think I'll probably knit that while I'm in between the rounds of the Sock Madness events. So round 1 of Sock Madness kicked off a couple of days ago, and I have been dying to get up here and record a podcast for you, but obviously I couldn't because I was hard at work knitting. This is a speed knitting competition, and I have a pair of socks. So the last pair of socks took me, what did I say, 7 or 8 days, and this pair of socks took me 4 days to complete, which is actually a little bit behind. I usually average about 2.5 to 3 days for a pair of socks during Sock Madness competitions of the past, but 4 days is not a bad start for these. This pattern is called Diamond Duality by Liz Harris. I do not know whether it will be a free or paid pattern when Sock Madness is over, but again, it is not currently available. As with every sock in Sock Madness, you must knit what they ask you to knit, so I didn't have any choice as far as, you have some choice. You can do whatever size they say or bigger, but you can't go smaller, and I find that a lot of these end up a little bit too big on me. So this pair of socks I may pull out to about here and then re-knit because it is just a little bit long in the foot. But we'll talk about this pattern here. So the yarn I used, this is Hedgehog Fibers in the colorway Beach Bunny, and this is Malabrigo sock yarn, and unfortunately I have lost the label, so I can't remember the name of the color. I thought it was Azul, but it is a gorgeous top-down stranded colorwork sock. The pattern has you use a smaller needle for the cuff and the plain stockinette sections of the foot and the toe, and then going up a needle size for the color work. And of course you do this with, a lot of people are recommending going up a needle size with color work because it tends to be less stretchy than the surrounding fabric. And what can happen is you end up with like strange puckerings or pulling in, or problems with your fit. I don't usually have a big problem with the elasticity of my color work when it comes to everything but socks. So my gauge stays pretty consistent. But the last time I knit a pair of colorwork socks was quite a long time ago, and I do remember those not fitting very well. So I just went ahead and trusted the pattern and went up a needle size. And I have some reservations about the needles I used, which I'll talk to you about in just a second. But these turned out great. There are 3 things I want to talk about with these socks just for some education. So the first one is Malabrigo sock yarn. I always hesitate to say negative things about any sort of company But I also know that I don't like watching podcasts where all they have to say are good things and everything is great and everything is wonderful, and then you don't really know, is everything great and wonderful, or are they just saying it to be nice? So I do love Malabrigo yarn. I love especially the way they dye. There's just something very unique about it, that I can spot a garment made out of Malabrigo yarns from very far away. But I have not had good luck with their sock yarns in the past. I'm thinking about, I did the Hermione's Everyday socks in Malabrigo yarn, and I noticed I had just been wearing them around my house for light wear, you know, not even putting them into shoes, but just kind of lounging around the house, and the soles had started to go pale, like the color had disappeared off of them. And then I took them with me for one hard day of wearing. So I was walking around a lot. I had them inside my shoes. And at the end of that day, I had holes in both the heels and the toes. And so it made me really, really sad. But I don't think that Malabrigo sock yarn has got the best durability if you're looking for a pair of everyday socks. Save that sock yarn for something else. And so I was not planning on using any of my Malabrigo yarn during Sock Madness this year, but it's so pretty. So I thought, well, I'm not using the Malabrigo yarn on the heel, which is really heavily worn, and this part will be stranded, so maybe I'll have a little bit of reinforcement. And if I get a hole here, well, that's not very much. I can just reknit that. So I did go ahead and use it, and hopefully I won't regret that choice later on down the line. But yes, if you do have Malabrigo sock yarn, just think about which socks you're planning to make with it, and think about maybe like a reinforcement thread held with it during the toes and heels might be useful. And I'll put up pictures of that sock pattern that I was talking about, because I did take pictures of it originally after it started to fade. I don't think I took pictures of the holes in it, but you can see what I'm talking about there. And you'll have to forgive the quality of those pictures, because those were Alaska wintertime pictures where I did my best to catch the sunlight when I could. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about is stranded color work and color dominance. Let's see if you can spot the difference here. So, let me see if I find where it's most obvious. Yeah, I think you can see it. So for one of these socks, I held the blue color dominant, and for one of the socks, I held the lighter blue color dominant. And I think you'll be able to see that the blue is more dominant on these lined sections here than they are here. Especially in here, you can see like this line is sort of, it doesn't look like a solid line. It looks like it's kind of eaten up, or I think the speckled yarn underneath is giving a little bit of that effect, but you have a much more solid yarn, solid line color on those sections. And that is the result of the way that you hold the yarn. So for one of those socks, I held the dark blue color in my right hand and the light in the left. And for the next sock, I switched it just to see what would happen there. If I were to do these socks again, what I would do instead, and I actually did it on this toe, is I held the darker blue as the dominant color for this section up until about right here. And then, you know, you can see that the pattern goes from primarily light to primarily dark right about that point. I switched, and that held the other color dominant. And it just helps the color kind of pop out and stand out a little bit better. When I first started knitting color work, of course, I hold one strand in each hand, which means that one of my hands is just a little more comfortable than the other based on whatever way you knit. And what I would do is I would look at each round, and if the round appeared to have more of one color, I would just hold that color in the hand that I was most comfortable with, and I didn't pay much attention to color dominance. And I did find that sometimes I was a little disappointed with the crispness of patterns that were done in color work. And so if that's something you've experienced or thought about, you might consider trying to play around with the idea of color dominance. The reason this happens is when you are carrying your yarn across the row, the two floats, one of them tends to be below the other. So imagine my two fingers are two floats, and this one here is going to be the lower one. The one that is lower naturally carries just a little bit more yarn with it because it's got to go kind of a little bit farther. And that little bit more yarn has the ability to work its way towards the front of the work and result in a little bit larger stitches. And as a result, those little bit larger stitches pop forward more than the other stitches. And so that's just something to consider when you're knitting. Yep, that's all I have to say about that subject. Subject number 3 when it comes to these socks is going to be your choice of needles when doing magic loop knitting. So when I first started knitting, I started knitting with double points, and I love double pointed needles. I just don't prefer them anymore. The reason I don't use them really so much anymore is that I never mastered that transition between the needles. I just always had a jog of some sort there. And so I switched over to doing any of my circular knitting as 2 circular needles in the round, where you have, say this is one circular needle and the other, and you kind of hold them together. This is not a shape I ever thought I would be making on my knitting podcast. And you would knit in the circle that way. And then eventually I came across magic loop knitting. We're having an intermission by Taco Cat. So eventually I moved over to magic loop knitting. Now the first time I tried it, I didn't like it at all. And I didn't do it for a long, long time. And then finally I found what I think was my breakthrough for magic loop knitting. And that was just finding the right circular needle to do it with. If you're not familiar with magic loop knitting, I'm going to give you a really quick primer here. So with magic loop knitting, you're going to put half your stitches on the needle. And I'm just going to kind of shove my needle through my ribbing here. Obviously, this is all bound off and done. So hopefully you guys can just visualize what I'm talking about here. But you put half of your stitches on your needle. You're going to pull this needle out a long way and then come back. So you're going to have this long loop here. And then your other half you can put onto the needles as well. And I think the biggest secret to magic loop knitting is getting a circular needle that has a very long cable and a very soft and flexible cable. And I particularly like the Addy brand for this, and I like the ChiaoGoo, their lace minis. That particular cable I think is really good for that too. So you had put your stitches on the needle, you'd pulled through, and then I came and picked up the rest of the stitches, okay? And so imagine that I had just knit all of those, and I've just reached here and I want to continue around the row. What I'm going to do is take the excess of the cable here and pull it until the needle is on the stitches. Okay, I'll take the other needle, pull it all the way through and fold back. And now I can continue knitting around, knit. And so as a result, you have these magic loops hanging off each side. And what can happen is if you have a very stiff cable or a very short cable is it kind of tries to pull apart right here. And as a result, you can get a pretty obvious ladder. The same way that you can if you're not careful with double pointed needles or any way you do circular knitting. But I have over the years come around to doing magic loop knitting for my socks. I especially like my ChiaoGoo. ChiaoGoo is not how you pronounce this brand. I'm going to put it right here. It's a Chinese brand. I think it's ChiaoGoo. I don't know. We're going to go with ChiaoGoo because that's how I've been saying it in my house for years to come. But they have an interchangeable set called the Lace Minis, and it has just the finest, most flexible, most beautiful cable I have ever seen in my life. However, I did not use those when I made my socks. Instead, I used my, these are ChiaoGoo fixed circulars, and they're not the Lace Mini set. And the cable is a little bit thicker and stiffer on these than on the minis. And why I didn't just go get my mini set out, I don't know. I was being stubborn, and I was being lazy, and that's what happens sometimes. But for the smaller needle, I was using, these are Addi fixed circulars, and it was a longer, you'll see, a longer cable. So this is where my ChiaoGoos end, and then I have this much more of my Addis. So for the smaller needle, longer, more flexible cable, and as a result, we'll show you. So this is the gusset of the heel, so this doesn't count as a jog, but this is where the needles were separated. And so you can see there's really not any sort of a jog there that you can appreciate. Maybe, when I say jog, what I mean is kind of like laddering or uneven stitches where you change needles, where you change from needle to needle that you can sometimes see. And I'll give you a great example of that in just a minute, but you can see that's not there. When I switched over to my other needles, which had a shorter and kind of stiffer cable, then this jog appears, and let's see. So you can see it really good right here. And that's also a little bit exaggerated by how poor of a job I did picking up stitches, but it continues up this line here. And you can just kind of, you can kind of see it. So yes, if I were to do these again, I would definitely get the right needles for that purpose. I don't think I would go up a whole needle size. So I did these on a US size 1, these on a US size 2, maybe I'd do a 1.5 or something like that. So some of this ladder I'll be able to deal with. These have been washed and blocked, so that's why it's maybe not quite as obvious as it was. I am not happy with the way I picked up here at the edge of the heel flap, so I'll go back through with probably a little bit of scrap yarn in this color and just duplicate stitch and kind of tighten that up a bit. But they turned out really well. They're adorable. I'm enjoying wearing them. I've been wearing them around the house all week because it's too hot to wear them outside. All right, I do have a couple more finished objects, and this week they are baby hats. These are super beginner friendly, so if you are a brand new knitter, I recommend this pattern. This pattern is called Tiny Tots, and it is a free pattern on Ravelry. It's as simple as they come. I knit this with Wister brand pop yarn, and it's just this adorable worsted weight yarn with little bitty pom-pommy looking slubs interspersed through. This one is obviously multicolor. Well, this one has just white pops. And these are designed to be worn kind of like jester hats. So the little edges the little pom-poms will drop down to the sides as you wear them. Hopefully I got them sized right. It's always a little bit difficult and unpredictable to size baby hats. But just to give you an idea of how simple this pattern is, it is a free pattern, so I don't feel bad about talking about it. You cast on however many stitches the pattern calls for, and you're just gonna knit. So you're doing a garter stitch fabric, which is produced by just knitting every single row because you're knitting flat. You knit it until it is as long as you want it to be, and then you fold it in half and seam up the edges. And so obviously I've got a little bit further to go on this hat still, but all you need to be able to do if you're a new knitter is cast on, knit, and bind off. And then you'll have to sew up the seams. And what I'm gonna do is put 2 links below for you for what I like to do for sewing up garter stitch fabric. I always start my seam join with what's called the figure 8 join, and what that does is it just completely evens the 2 edges, so you don't end up with like kind of a ladder or a stair step where you don't get quite even with your stitches. And then for sewing up the edges, the biggest tip is just one side you're going to pick up the smile part of the garter stitch ridge, and the other side you're going to pick up the frown part of the garter stitch ridge. And if you look at garter stitch fabric, you can kind of see, just imagine that these are little frowns and smiles, frowns and smiles. And those are kind of your targets that you're going to pick up as you're seaming. Like I said, I'll put below 2 links. One is the figure 8 join, and the other is how to seam garter stitch fabrics. Hopefully that'll make some of your guys' work a little bit easier. And it's kind of funny because I didn't do a great job seaming these. What? What? But just so you can see here, this is where the seam is. And you can see that it's there, but it's pretty smooth. It's not a real obvious standout seam. On the inside edge, it looks like this. And then I did make pom-poms for these. You can also, again, just Google how to make pom-poms. I'll put a link below to instructions how to make pom-poms if you don't have a pom-pom maker. But I do. I love the little plastic pom-pom makers that you can buy at most craft stores. I'll show you a picture of mine here. And they come in all different sizes. So this is obviously the smaller sized pom-pom maker. And these guys are actually pretty big. I feel like I can, oh yeah. This is my tinfoil hat, so to speak here. But I have 3 done. I have 1 on the needles. I'll probably make 5 total because I mentioned that I have 5 pregnant coworkers, and I hope that they like them. I know it's kind of a subjective pattern there with the weird little 2 pom-poms. Oh man, the picture of the pattern for the Ravelry pattern page is just adorable. I'll have to put that one in too. But that is it for finished objects this week. Let's move on to works in progress. Last episode, I showed you a whole bunch of pictures of my acquisitions of some Tanis Fiber Arts yarn. Tanis is a husband and wife. Tanis Fiber Arts is a husband and wife team in Canada, and they make gorgeous, gorgeous yarns. I do like that they offer what's called a PureWash line, so they're trying to be a little more eco-friendly with how yarn producers are doing superwash. So superwash basically is a technique where they coat wool yarn so that it's less likely to felt, and that process, my understanding is, can be kind of hard on the environment and have some chemical byproducts that are less desirable. And so you should go check out their podcast. They recently started podcasting again, which makes me really, really happy because I love watching them. But I have cast this on and made quite a bit of progress, considering that this week I knit, a pair of giant socks and a couple of baby hats. This is quite a lot of work to get done. I am so smitten with this yarn and the colors. I mean, this highlighter color is just like to die for. I knit the Luminosity hat twice last year, and I just really fell in love with this color, which is called Peacock, and just thought, oh man, I need a whole sweater in it. So it is very bright. I've heard a couple of people say it's very Japan appropriate. I don't know if that's a thing, like Japan is known for bright colors, but just been super pleasant. I flew through this yoke faster than anything I've ever done. It's got just a little bit of a garter stitch collar. I used a long tail tubular cast on for that, and then just transitioned over to the garter stitch. So it makes kind of an interesting collar. You won't really be able to appreciate that very well. So obviously this is a top-down yoke sweater. I'm going to be knitting it as a t-shirt. I am knitting it a little bit smaller than what I normally wear for a sweater because I'm trying to transition into knitting t-shirts. I think you can see, like for example, this guy here is pretty big on me, and I was just kind of still in the mindset that I was knitting myself sweaters that I was wearing in Alaska, where I would have a shirt or a long sleeve or long johns or something underneath it. And so I'm having to readjust my thinking about what sizes I wear. But this guy is turning out great. I am of course now into the dreaded land of stockinette stitch for the body. And then I'll probably incorporate a little bit more color work into the edges of the sleeves, maybe just right before I bind off, to make it a little more interesting for me, because otherwise all the fun part's done, right? I already did all the color work, and now I just have miles and miles of stockinette stitch. I am alternating skeins, so I bought 2 skeins for this, and on the Tanis Fiber Arts website, they have said they do always send you the same dye lot. They dye to order, basically, so if they don't have enough already in stock of the same dye lot, they'll go ahead and dye more. But it being a hand-dyed yarn, there are differences. And I think, can you see them from here? Because I can see them from here. This skein has a lot more white in it, and I noticed it immediately. As soon as I unwrapped the skein, there were just some spots where the dye didn't saturate all the way in to the skein, and thus there are some more white spots. And that's totally fine, but there aren't any in the skein almost at all. Like there's no bright white on that skein at all. So had I knit the whole thing in one skein and then switched to the other, it would have been pretty obvious that there was a difference. So I did not do any alternating of skeins until I separated for the sleeves, honestly, because that's when I remembered I should be doing it. But I don't think it's going to make a big difference. There was some short row shaping and stuff after the color work yoke anyway, which makes a line. Can you see it? There it is. So after the short work shaping, that's when I started alternating skeins, and I'm doing that by helical knitting. Helical knitting may sound really difficult, but it is super duper easy to do. So if you are a person who uses a lot of hand-dyed yarn and wants to start alternating your skeins of yarn while you knit, I would recommend checking that out. I will put a link below. I think I'm just going to kind of keep a running playlist of good videos that I've found that demonstrate how to do techniques well and clearly. Something that I experienced when I was doing the Master Knitter program is you kind of have to evaluate whether information is to be trusted or not, and you have to get sources that agree with each other. And what I found was that a lot of YouTube videos will explain how to do things in different ways, and not all of them are correct. So I'm not going to make any sort of commentary about what's correct or not correct in knitting, because obviously this is a hobby and a craft and an art, and you can play and experiment and do whatever you want. But I did find that wading through a lot of different technique videos was sometimes exhausting. So if these are techniques you're interested in, I'm going to try my best to keep a running playlist of knitting techniques and try to label them nicely so that they're easy to find their way through if you're interested. Something else I was thinking about too is I know I mentioned before that I'm a left-handed knitter. I knit from left to right across the row, which is backwards from what most people do. And I thought if there are any more advanced knitting techniques that you would like to see demonstrated as a left-handed knitter would do them, I would love to make some tutorial videos about that. When I was starting to learn how to knit, I just kind of had to Google left-handed knitting and follow along and see what I could find. And at the time, there wasn't a lot of resources out there. There's definitely a lot more now, but I do find that a lot of the resources are more beginner resources, like how to cast on, how to knit, how to purl as a left-handed person. So if there are more complicated things like lace or cables or shaping that you're interested in, leave a comment below and I'll be glad to make some videos on those. Anyway, let's get back to works in progress. All right, my last work in progress for the day is a little unusual for me. Can you guess what this is? So this is it's supposed to be a crocheted llama in progress. I know in previous weeks I talked to you about some acquisitions I made where I bought locally from a local crochet crafter that lives here on island, and I bought that cute little cuttlefish and sheep for my walls, and every day I pass them and look at them and think, oh, those are so cute. I would really love to crochet cute little creatures. And anyway, my finished socks that I was talking to you about earlier, these guys, these are made in, the yarn is called the Backyard Chicken Collection by Loco, and it's dyed to look like different breeds of chickens. I talked about that in previous episodes, and I had quite a bit of yarn left over, and I thought, wouldn't it be cute to crochet some little chickens out of the chicken yarn? And I even went to her website and started looking at the sets and thinking about buying some more chicken dyed colorways. But that sent me down the rabbit hole on Ravelry of looking at little crocheted animals, and I found these two free patterns for very cute crocheted alpacas or llamas, I'm not sure which, and they had cute little blankets and accessories and stuff like that, and I thought I would make some for myself. And so when I was out at the store, I happened to stop in the little craft store Pandora House here in Okinawa and found Loop. This is Loop yarn by Daruma. There you go. Can you read any of that? No, you cannot. That's okay. Not that you could anyway, because a lot of it's in Japanese. This one happened to have English translation also. So this is 83% wool and 17% baby alpaca, and it was pretty cheap. It worked out to about $4 a ball. And the yarn looks like this. And I thought, wouldn't that be cute to make a little crocheted alpaca with? The face is just some leftover, it's Brooklyn Tweed Loft leftover from my Arrows Down sweater. And we'll see how this goes. The pattern that I was following asks you to make these little loops, single crochet loops, where you start from one a double crochet on the previous row, you single crochet a little loop and then go back into that same spot. I am not doing that just because my yarn is already kind of fuzzy in doing it, so I'm just doing a row of single crochet all the way around. We'll see how these turn out. I suspect that if the yarn weren't so difficult to use, I probably would have been done with this by now, but I don't have a lot of hopes that this is going to make its way all the way into a full-size alpaca, because it's big. Like, the pictures are so cute and they look like they're these little things, maybe like this big, and here I am, I'm like on the face of it and it's already bigger than I thought it was going to be. So I don't know if these are going to continue on, but I do want to do some cute little crochet projects. I don't think I have the right yarn available for it at this time, so we shall see. But crochet is happening. I've been dreaming about some weaving. I actually, we'll see. There's a weaving studio down in Naha. I was just thinking, like, I should go today and go check it out. But with all of this, coronavirus and social distancing and things like that, I think maybe I'll save that for another time. But I did read yesterday about a weaving studio down in Naha that I'd like to go check out at some point, and I see that they have classes since I'm somewhat of a beginner weaver. But I was looking at a couple of YouTube videos on how to sew with your woven stuff and, put your interfacing on, and I thought, wouldn't it be cute to make some project bags using my hand woven fabric? So maybe those are some future plans, maybe not. We'll see how it goes. That's going to be it for my knitting content today. I am going to talk a little bit about life here in Japan. So if you want to stick around, I hope you will. It's always so awkward when I do this exit. I don't know, I'm bad at it. Anyway, if I'm done talking about yarny stuff. So if that's where you're done, bye, have a good day. And if you want to stick around for Okinawa stuff, stay tuned. All right, life in Okinawa this week. So, of course, we got to talk about the coronavirus because that's worldwide, right? A couple of days ago, I was thinking, this is interesting. We've had 3 cases of coronavirus on this island, and they were all more than 2 weeks ago, and there haven't been any more. And isn't that nice? That our small island has no cases of the coronavirus. And then I found out today that there's 3 new cases this week. So there goes all of my warm fuzzy feelings about being in this safe, isolated island. Of course, Okinawa is a small, remote island. It's only accessible by air. Its longest point is 60 miles-ish. Its widest point, I don't know. I don't know these dimensions well. I always say it's roughly 60 miles by 7 miles, but that might be a little bit off. I'll get those actual numbers here. But as a result of it being pretty small and fairly remote, I felt a little protected. And I just knew, I know, it's coming. This wave of coronavirus is coming, and soon I will be where the whole rest of the world is. Right now, as it is, Japan it's not real obvious here as far as like social distancing and things like that. The schools have shut down. Large events are being discouraged and mostly canceled. But they weren't telling us stay home, don't go out, things like that. And I imagine that's coming. That's in the forefront. Of course, I am not coming to you from Tokyo today. If you watched my previous episode, I was talking about how I was so excited about my upcoming trip. We did choose to cancel that. All non-essential travel on and off this island is being discouraged at this time. But of course, this is an island that is dependent on shipping. So it's going to happen. We're going to have people constantly shipping in and out food and supplies and fuel and work, etc. So before all of the kind of lockdown craziness started, we did decide to make use of our time off with just some staycation time. So we were in an Airbnb. We did go out to one of the more remote islands. So it's still accessible by car. Right now we're being limited on travel off the island by ferry or boat, but anything you can drive to. Because this is a cluster of small islands, we just kind of count it as mainland. Okinawa is the name of the prefecture and the cluster of islands, and also the name of the largest island, which has several smaller islands around it that you can travel to by car. In the past, I've shown you Hamahiga Jima, and this time we went to Kouri Jima, which is, Jima means island, so Kouri Island. If I had to spell that in Roman letters, it would be Kouri, Kouri. Gorgeous little island. It first had a bridge built out to it, I think 2005-ish time frame, so it actually hasn't had a lot of traffic, a lot of infrastructure and things like that built until more recently. And obviously it is booming now because everywhere you look there were little Airbnbs and hotels being built and growing up. But it was a very cute little island. Okinawa is obviously suffering from a tourism standpoint. Nobody's coming, nobody's traveling right now. So all the little mom and pop shops, they were open and empty. And that was it was kind of sad because some of the cases, the owners were just kind of chilling on the front step, hoping people would come in. So we did go out to eat at several of these small mom and pop shops. I'll throw some pictures up here. I had some awesome acai bowls. Taco rice. Taco rice, if this is not a familiar phrase to you, it's really a result of Americans occupying this island following World War II, and there wasn't access to like the corn and flour tortillas that tacos were made out of. It's funny that Americans brought it here. Tacos are Mexican food, right? But also, very much an American food nowadays. And so taco rice became a thing, and it's just rice with all your taco fixings on top, and it's delicious. Just about every little shop here on island you can get a version of it, which is great. Yeah, we got into the water on the beach. The beach was pretty much empty. A couple of people scattered around here or there. I tried to feed my fingers to a horse. There was one of the bars had a horse out front. I don't know why. And they had you could feed the horse, and my husband reached up and pat him, and no problem. And then I reached up and he tried to take a chunk out of my hand. So horses don't like me. I don't know what that's about. But all in all, just kind of a relaxing weekend. We didn't really do much besides have some lunches, and then we cooked at the Airbnb and relaxed on the beach in the evenings. I also went to the botanical gardens here, which was gorgeous. I'll put in a lot of pictures and videos at the end of that. Of course, one of the hazards of living near a military base is military activity going on while you're trying to enjoy your botanical garden. So a lot of the videos are interrupted by planes overhead and alarms and sirens going off. I'm not sure what was happening that particular day, but all in all, it's been a somewhat slow vacation. It's probably something I needed because I tend to plan vacations that are go, 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 go. And then when I get home, I need a vacation from my vacation. So lots of sock knitting, lots of crafting, lots of just relaxing at home. And that's not so bad. It's just an odd time to take vacation because everybody is talking about being stuck at home, and I'm on vacation stuck at home, and it's just a little this weird kind of disconnect feeling going on here. But yeah, that's how life is at the moment here in Okinawa. I am sure the coronavirus wave of infection is heading this way, and hopefully we respond well to it. I heard up on the mainland they're talking about reopening some of the schools soon, which I don't know how I feel about that. I feel like maybe they closed them a little too early based on the infection rate because it wasn't really here yet. And now they're wishing they hadn't closed them so early because they're going to have to close them longer, I think. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. I wonder if the sock knitting rounds are going to go faster because so many people are at home. Anyway, that is it for me today, guys. Stay tuned. After here, I'll show a bunch of the pictures from my staycation in Okinawa and of the botanical garden. It was truly gorgeous. And everybody stay safe. I'd love to hear from you, so reach out with any chatter or questions you have. And as always, have a great day.